Greetings, everyone, and thank you for your interest in the Conservation Through Clay exhibition. It's truly an honor to be working with the acclaimed staff at the North Dakota Museum of Art and to be able to utilize such a beautiful space to showcase the work that has been created during my National Park artist in residencies over the past 6 years. I certainly wish I could be delivering this short gallery talk in person and visiting with everyone and answering questions, but I do still hope that you can visit the museum to not only view the ceramic work themselves, but the large scale photographs, banners, and interpretive text that tries to tell the intertwined and rich story of the national parks and their relationship with artists. The museum has now reopened to more normal operating hours, so I urge you to support them and their efforts for the arts in our state and the region. In beginning to speak about this exhibition, I really must add a little background context. So my 25 plus year pursuit of investigating how mankind or humankind has interacted with and relied upon clay since almost the beginning of time is really the starting point. From roads to buildings to dentistry to vessels and even brick, I've been interested in cross-disciplinary studies of archaeology and geology, and not too many folks know that I had the honor of carrying on the former UND ceramic professor Catherine McCleary's tradition of becoming one of only 19 brick sculptors in the nation. And as you can see, these influences are represented in my logo. The large-scale vessels depicted here on the left are from a solo exhibit at the Rourke Art Museum perhaps 10 years ago. And you can see a 6-foot tall Grecian vessel, as well as a 4-foot tall and 4-foot wide Peruvian Canteros jar. On the right there is a pit-fired 3.5-foot porcelain vessel with a brick clay base that's entitled Building Civilization. So it's in this backdrop and these investigations that extended my interest towards the National Park Artist in Residency programs. The first theme that you'll see in the exhibition is the relationship of national parks and artists that stretches back from the very beginning of these institutions over 100 years ago. Some of us might be unaware that it was actually the visual representations from artists that led to Congress declaring Yellowstone the world's first national park back in 1872, and the National Park Service actually being founded then in 1916. So it was fortuitous for me that the 100th year anniversary of the national parks occurred in 2016, which coincided right in the middle of my 6-year project. This famous Thomas Moran image of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone was one of the works that was pivotal in convincing Congress and ultimately President Grant to preserve our nation's most important national, cultural, historic landscapes and spaces. It's not hard to imagine the impact that these epic images would have had on convincing a congressman who hadn't traveled to the site of the importance of preserving it for the benefit of the nation's citizens. Wallace Stegner said, "National parks are the best idea we ever had. Absolutely American, absolutely democratic. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst." And perhaps now more than ever, this quote rings true. 3 years after the National Park Service was founded in 1916, the National Park Foundation was begun in 1919. Likewise, then celebrating their 100th year anniversary just a few years ago here in 2019. Preserving our parks has proven to be one of those rare unifying national issues we need so badly in our country right now that everyone should be able to get behind. So my first artist in residency experience, was at Lewis and Clark State Park in North Dakota on Lake Sakakawea. This 2-week residency began to teach me the requirements of being an air program in terms of providing public programs and really trying to find a process to tell the story of the park. So the second theme that quickly emerged in this work was geology, topography, landforms, rock formations. The archaeology professor, colleagues of mine at MSUM, loaned me a book entitled The Geology of the Lewis and Clark Trail, which was a fantastic way to prepare for this residency, as I was able to stop at significant geophysical points as I traveled across North Dakota, and was able actually to see the things that Lewis and Clark noted and drew in their own journals. So my first residency did focus largely on geology as both an aesthetic and physical theme, which was certainly a topic that was worthy of research and exploration, and a muse that continued through the rest of my residencies. So here's another example of my work closely responding to landforms at the Petrified National Park, Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. This formation is called the Badlands. North Dakotans, I hope, recognize these landforms, as there are only two places on Earth where they exist. So it was at this park in Arizona, and we recognize them from, of course, the Badlands in North and South Dakota. These images are from my residency at Lewis and Clark. And on the first night that we were there, my son and I were settling by the shore of Lake Sakakawea to watch the sunset. And as dusk approached, the scene was interrupted by our count of 14 oil wells that were flaring natural gas across the horizon. So it was at this point that I began to realize that besides this park having the only armed park rangers that I had ever seen, and hearing gunshots during our stay, this park was under genuine conservation threat. And so without seeking this theme, it continued to impose itself loudly in different ways at each of the residencies that I experienced. So soon after, the National Parks Conservation Association published a document that listed one of my favorite places on Earth, the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, as the third most threatened park in the country. Mesa Verde National Park, which I later did a residency at, was also in the top 10. The map on the right here shows the north and south units of Theodore Roosevelt Park in green, with the oil wells kind of circling the park. And this was before 180 new sites were approved in 2019 near the Little Missouri River, which flows right through the park. Without going into further detail about the billions of cubic feet of natural gas that North Dakota was allowing to be wasted annually, these concerns led me to additional research and quotations from famed naturalists, politicians, philosophers, and indigenous leaders, such as this quote from Theodore Roosevelt himself, where he said, "I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful use the generations that come after us." The joy and inspiration that I found during my first residency led me toward a new series of work and a bigger project that led to completing 5 of these residencies in 6 years, and resulted in over 200 works being created. 100 of these works were created in situ, that is, in the park themselves, and nearly 50 of these works are featured in this exhibition, along with some large-scale photographs and, of course, educational text. I tried to honor each of the park's unique voices, character, and history. Doing so involved a lot of research as well as physical investigation through hiking and photography, and taking clay and geological samples in the surrounding region around the parks. In all instances, I attempted to study, recognize, and honor the contributions of the indigenous people who occupied the land first. As I tried to create authentic contemporary work, I also tried to place these North American uses of clay, earth, and ancient art forms in a global context of how humans from almost all cultures and continents around the world have used and interacted with clay really since the beginning of time. These are a few more examples of some of the work from the residency at Mesa Verde. Each park certainly deserved its status and designation, in my opinion. They were all incredibly unique and distinct. The most remote and primitive of them all that I visited was the Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument, which was over 1 million acres of wilderness without any roads. So many preparations, precautions, warnings are in place here, as almost always you would be alone and probably 48 hours away from assistance if you were to need it. So I was required to carry a satellite phone and left the ranger station with a 14-day itinerary. The two artists in residence in consecutive years before me both ended up having to call out for help and be rescued at some point during their time there. The vehicle shown on the lower left was actually on the park website and came with a disclaimer that this driver died from hypothermia. So this was a residency that had to be considered carefully and prepared for. The top left image here captures my work process pretty nicely, showing research books, maps, sketchbooks, field notes, and of course the portable studio setup that I would have to bring with me. Here we're set up in front of the lodge on Mount Trumbull, which is where I stayed a portion of the time. The last thing that the ranger told me was, remember, when you're out on Mount Trumbull hiking, it is mountain lion territory, so you don't have to bother making any noise to scare them away. They'll know you're there and they'll be tracking you. So if you bend down, be sure your back is to a tree or a cliff. I certainly have to acknowledge that I received a lot of assistance throughout this project in the form of grants, fellowships, sponsorships, and curatorial assistance from author and educator Pamela Sund. Pamela wrote a beautiful article for Ceramics Monthly magazine that is linked on the North Dakota Museum of Art website. Copies are also available for free in the museum. So in sharing some brief glimpses of each of the parks, this is a picture of the Petrified Forest National Park, the lodging there, which was a casita, which is an historic adobe revival building with an outdoor patio where I got to set up and work. And this park had some really incredible kind of otherworldly landscapes. These are a few works from the Petrified Forest Residency. I took a lapidary class in preparation for this visit, so learning how to cut and polish the rock became important as I began to use them as bases or handles to better tell the story of the relationship of rock as the parent material to clay. It's important to note that collecting materials at all of these parks or monuments is strictly prohibited. Rangers would direct me to public lands and rock shops where I could procure, local materials. The Grand Canyon Parashant Monument did allow a collector's permit, and with that, you could gather up to 25 pounds of material per day. This quote is from Chief Luther Standing Bear, a Northern Plains tribal leader from the Oglala Sioux tribe. And he said, the Lakota was a true naturalist, a lover of nature. He loved the earth and all things of the earth, and the attachment grew with age. The old people came literally to love the soil, and they sat or reclined on the ground with a feeling of being close to a mothering power. Spending nearly 10 weeks in these residencies, often alone in the wilderness, certainly produced some intense and I would even say spiritual experiences for me, and helped me appreciate more deeply the wisdom of these indigenous teachings and sayings like this. My most recent artist in residency was in 2019 at Red Rock National Conservation Area, which is only 20 minutes from Las Vegas. It's an incredibly picturesque and busy park that receives over 2 million visitors a year, which certainly creates some very unique conservation challenges here. Red Rock is only one of 2 parks in the country that is completely self-funded, and due to their heavy visitor rate. Most days this park completely shuts down when it reaches capacity, and the waiting line of cars can reach more than a mile long. Again, in conclusion, my summary, my thanks, I should say, to the North Dakota Museum of Art for debuting this body of work, and Pamela Sund for her curatorial assistance in the project. I thank all the organizations and institutions that were mentioned previously for their support, and most importantly, I thank my wife Sue and our children for their patience and support in allowing me these life-changing experiences and this precious work time. In conclusion, please enjoy the following inspiring thoughts from around the world regarding nature, national parks, clay, and conservation that express well the intent of my project. And thanks for clicking and being interested.